Why did TLC file for bankruptcy after selling 10 million albums? Don't go chasing waterfalls. Please stick to checking your contracts and chasing your royalties. Hello, and welcome to Whose Song Is It Anyway? Hosted by me, creative industries legal expert, Dr. HAYLEIGH BOSHER. I'll be your guide to the big legal questions shaping the music and creative industries right now. Think of this as your weekly dose of all things copyright, ownership, and intellectual property. In this episode, we're going to cover what's contract got to do with copyright? What do you actually need to know before signing anything? Can you renegotiate your contract? And can you get AI to write a contract for you? But first, story time. You know TLC. They are one of the 5 best-selling American girl groups of all time, and they've sold over 60 million records worldwide. But why did they file for bankruptcy? After 2 studio albums, one released in 1992 and the other in 1994, they became one of the biggest girl groups ever, selling about 10 million albums at that point, which only the Spice Girls had sold more. However, despite that success, the members of TLC filed for bankruptcy in 1995. Their record company was making money, other people were making money from their music, but they weren't seeing any of it and they weren't happy. So they stormed their record label. There's a film about it, so you can go and watch the scene. And there's an interview with one of the TLC members, and she says that in the movie, they actually played it down a bit. And in real life, it was kind of more intense. So they stormed the offices of their record label and demand that something change. And actually, the police got involved. So after the New York Police Department intervened in this standoff between TLC and the record label, they were actually able to renegotiate. And filing for bankruptcy was an important part of that strategy for restructuring their finances. But what it really shows is that the terms of the contract are so important. Other people were making money from their music, but they weren't seeing a fair share. TLC also re-recorded some of their sound recordings from their first 2 albums so that they were able, at the time, to control those sound recording rights, which you'll know this strategy because this is Taylor's version. This is what Taylor Swift has done more recently and everyone's heard about it. But she wasn't the first person to do that. There are actually many others, and one of them was TLC. Whilst TLC didn't sign the most favourable contract the first time, they were able to renegotiate the terms and re-record their sound recordings so that they were in a stronger position later on. So what's contract got to do with copyright anyway? So copyright and contract are often thought of as different things, and they are in law 2 different areas of law really. But the thing about copyright is that it's completely managed by contract. If you are ever enforcing your copyright, selling your copyright, licensing your copyright, doing split sheets, working with other people, everything is managed by contract. So a contract is pretty much just an agreement recognized by law. It's just where we write down what we've agreed so everybody can see clear as day what the terms of the agreement are. And we have specified in the contract who's doing what, who's making what money, who owns what, when, how, why. Okay? So contract is how you manage your copyright. And it's really important to remember that contracts were made to be negotiated. And I think this is something that often we forget. A contract is placed in front of us and we just sign it. But that's not really how contracts are supposed to work. If someone places a contract in front of you, you're supposed to read it, ideally get legal advice, and then negotiate the terms. Because if it's written by the other party, whoever they are, it's going to be written with their preferences in mind. Even if they're being fair and reasonable, you still want to look at the contract and suggest some renegotiation points, suggest some changes that may be more favourable to you or directed towards a mutual benefit of the contract. This message is particularly important for the women listening because women are less likely to negotiate their contract than men. Sometimes we're just so excited to be signing a contract, we forget that we're supposed to be negotiating the terms as well, or that we have permission or are able to. So here's your permission. If a contract comes across your desk, you have permission from me. And I strongly encourage you to renegotiate or negotiate your deals. Just me interrupting myself to let you know that if you're looking for a guide to navigating the world of copyright in music and the creative industries, you can pick up the new edition of my book, Copyright in the Music Industry. In it, I share everything you need to know about copyright, intellectual property, and more on navigating the world of AI. And I go into much further detail about the topics I've spoken about today. It's straightforward, digestible, and most importantly, will empower you to make the right moves to protect your own work. I'll leave the link in the episode description for you to pick up your copy. To give you an idea about how important contracts are when you sign them and the longevity of those contracts, let me tell you about the Sex Pistols. So the Sex Pistols signed a band agreement, which is just a type of contract between band members where we set out and decide who owns what, who's responsible for what, how does everyone get paid, what happens if the band split up. These are the kind of things that you would see in a typical band contract. So in the Sex Pistols contract, like most band contracts, there's usually a clause that says how decisions are made. Because when you're an artist on your own, you're fine. You just make the decision whether to sign, whether to sell, whatever it is that's happening, you decide. But if you have more than one person, then there might need to be a clause in the contract to say who has final say. If there's more than 3 people, what's quite handy is majority rules, which is also very common in that situation. So some bands decide we have to all agree, otherwise we don't go forward, whereas others decide if the majority of us want to move forward with whatever the decision is, then we'll do it. So years after signing a contract for the band, the Sex Pistols were offered the opportunity for a documentary to be made about them. Most of the band members wanted to do the documentary, but one of them didn't. Maybe he didn't love how he was coming across in said documentary. But anyway, the point is, their contract was pretty vague and short, but it did have in it a clause that said majority rules. It wasn't super clear, and so they ended up going to court to get a judge to rule on the meaning of the contract. And the judge decided that it did say majority rules, and the documentary was made with that decision-making process, which was agreed at the time, or at least that's what the contract said. So it's really important in your contracts to understand how decisions are made and what the contract means for you, because this happened years and years later when the band weren't even performing or writing together anymore. These contracts can still stand for years and years after, depending. Some contracts have a duration, so they end after a certain period of time. But even then, some of the clauses go on. So it's really important to understand the scope of any contract that you're signing. How long is it going to last? How long are these rules or obligations or responsibilities going to be on you? So what do you actually need to understand before you sign anything? Contracts typically set out responsibilities or obligations. So that's what each party are going to do. So if it's a band contract, it might be according to the contract, I'm going to do the singing, you're going to do the songwriting, and we're all going to show up to practice. Really practical things sometimes. The responsibilities are obligations, so they're things that you must do. So you should check. In a record deal, for example, it might be that you have to deliver a certain number of singles or albums, and you're obligated to do that under the contract, if that's what it says. So it's a really important part to look out for. Typically, a contract will also set out who has final say or decision-making power. That might be you, that might be the other person, it may be joint, but you need to understand who's going to be able to decide if something goes ahead or if something is held back. A contract should also set out the ownership of the intellectual property and the copyright, typically. So it may be that you own it, but you're licensing the use of it to someone, or vice versa. But the impact of that is whether when the contract ends, then what happens to the copyright? Is it still yours? It doesn't belong to you anymore. You need to know where the IP rights lie. Of course, contracts should cover payment, how much you're getting paid, whether that's an upfront payment. Often in record deals, this is called an advance. And it's recouped back, meaning that you'll pay it back with any royalties earned based on your royalty rate before you see any more money. So be really clear about what money you're getting up front, what royalties you're getting, and which parts of the income will be used to repay the advance and which will parts of the income can come straight to you. There's this thing called 360 deals that I think is worth flagging and being aware of. What that means is the income from everything that you do goes through that contract. Whereas other contracts that aren't 360 deals will set out more specifically which income streams it will draw from. And it's really important to know the difference between those two. So it's really important that you get independent legal advice if a contract is presented to you, so that you can really understand what it is that you're signing, what obligations you're being held to, who owns the thing that you're creating, and how and when you'll get paid. If you're signing a major label contract, they'll typically actually pay for you to get legal advice, because it's also important for them that you know what you're signing. Be careful to check whether that's actually recouped as part of your advance or whether they're paying for it. But either way, it's very helpful because you might not have the cash up front to pay for contract review. You can also get help with legal advice if you're a member of the Musicians Union and any other collective organisations such as the IVAS Academy and the Featured Artists Coalition. They'll also provide information that might be helpful. So let me tell you another story about JoJo. We know JoJo. We love her. This poor woman has been through a journey with her copyright because of a contract that she signed when she was just 12 years old. So in 2003, JoJo signed a record deal when she was 12 years old. She released a debut single in 2004, and then her first album also came out in 2004, and her second album came out in 2006. She's doing really well. She's hitting top charts. At that point, everything's going great for JoJo and her record label and everybody else on the team who's drawing income from this music. However, by 2009, things had started to go wrong. She made a statement on her YouTube account saying that she was waiting for her record label to sign a distribution deal so that her third album could be released. And from there, it became clear that there was some trouble at the record label and some problems where the third album just wasn't coming. JoJo filed a lawsuit in 2009 against her record label for putting her in this limbo where they weren't releasing her music. Later on that year, they were able to settle at that point, and they agreed that the album would be distributed. However, the label then, in 2012, lost their distribution deal and wasn't able to release that album. So in 2013, she files another lawsuit against her label, saying that they're damaging her professional career and that she had signed the contract in 2004 when she was a minor because she was 12. And under New York state law, which is the governing law of that contract, contracts signed with a minor only last for 7 years. And therefore, she should have been out of contract by 2011, which meant she could go her separate ways from the record label and release another way. December 2013, they settled the case again. And JoJo announced that she was going to sign with a new record deal. Her third album was finally released in October 2016. So that's 10 years from her second album, which you know is just too little too late. She also, like TLC and Taylor Swift, re-recorded the albums, the first two albums that she had released, so that she could re-own her own sound recordings after all the trouble that she had had with her record labels. So again, she maybe didn't sign a great deal at the beginning, although it started off really well and then it went downhill. So things can change. You can't always know what the future holds. It might actually be a great contract, but sometimes things don't work out. She unfortunately had to sue her record label in order to get them to settle, which is not ideal. Going to court is a last resort for everybody because it's expensive and time consuming and emotionally draining. No one wants to be doing that. But sometimes, obviously, in JoJo's case, it was the only action that she could take that actually got her released eventually from her record deals. So renegotiation is important, and so is, if possible, owning your own copyright. So can I renegotiate my contract? It depends on where you are, because the laws are different in different countries, okay? If you're in the EU, they have this copyright directive that means across all of the European Union countries, there's a contract adjustment mechanism, which means if you sign a contract for a copyright deal, anything copyright related, not just music, if you sign the deal and at the time of the deal, the estimated value of that deal turns out to be much, much less than is ultimately made from the deal or from the copyright work, you have a right to go back and renegotiate that contract and make sure that you are proportionately paid. So that's really good. That's safeguarded in law to make sure that people aren't unfairly exploited. In the UK, it was always possible to renegotiate your contract with your record deal, but maybe the process wasn't super clear. People didn't always know that that was possible, and different record labels have different processes. Before the streaming inquiry, it was actually always possible to renegotiate your deal with a record label. And it's common practice when the deal comes to an end or towards the end of a contract that a record label might be like, we want to keep working with you, let's relook at the contract. Or if it's not working out, maybe it's time to go our separate ways. However, the process wasn't super clear, and maybe people didn't really know that that was always an option to renegotiate. So now we have a voluntary agreement between the record labels in the UK music industry that they will have a kind of streamlined process. If you're on a major label record deal in the UK and you write to your record label and you ask them to renegotiate your contract, they have to respond to you within 60 days. They don't have to renegotiate and they don't actually have to give you what you want, but they do have to follow a reasonable process. Renegotiating your contract, whether that's possible for you or whether that's lucrative for you, will entirely depend on what leverage you have. If you go to your record label and you're like, we're doing really well and we're going to try this new thing, this new strategy, here's what we're going to do to boost sales or whatever it is, then you're more likely to get a renegotiation. If things haven't been working out and you haven't delivered, it's going to be much more difficult and maybe impossible. But the point is, you do have the right to ask and they have to respond to you. So it is possible to renegotiate your contract. What that looks like at the end entirely depends on your renegotiation skills and the leverage you have to bring to that renegotiation. A bonus question for this episode that I think is so important to address, because as someone who works as a consultant in the creative industries, I'm constantly reviewing contracts and writing contracts. And in recent years, you won't be surprised to hear, I've come across quite a few contracts that are clearly written by AI. Totally understand why people might think writing a contract is super scary or complicated, or I don't really know how to do that. So I'll just ask ChatGPT or whatever it is to help me with that. So the answer is technically, yes, you can. You can, and I've seen them. They've come across my desk. But my advice to you would be to keep it simple. A contract is just an agreement recognized by law. You don't need ChatGPT to write a contract for you. You can do it yourself. And here's what's really important. When you get an AI-generated contract, it has a lot of nonsense in it. Remember that AI is just pattern recognition software that is just predicting based on the data that it has. It doesn't have actual legal knowledge and understanding. And I can tell straight away when a contract is written by AI, because there are glaringly obvious mistakes, but they're sort of like twisted truths, or I can see like, oh, they mean this clause, but it's got mixed up with that clause. You know, there are clear signs. So the point is that yes, AI can do it for you, but you're actually taking a huge risk there, because the contract might say something that you don't really understand what it says, and it's not actually legally accurate, and it's much better if you can't afford legal advice and you can't afford to get a lawyer or a legal consultant to write the contract for you, you are far safer writing down in your own words what it is that you're agreeing to. And especially if it's something like you and your business partner or your songwriting partner are going to work together on a project, it doesn't need to be super complicated. It doesn't need all these crazy legal terminologies in it. I mean, ideally, you would get a legal expert to help you, because then it's going to be top notch. But for me, I think if you're going to use AI, you're better off doing it yourself, because all you need is clear language that says what it is that you're agreeing to. And if the other person is clear on the same thing, so you're both clear on what it is that you're agreeing to, because it's written in your own clear language, specifying in your own words what it is that you're agreeing to, that's all you need. You don't actually need AI to write a contract for you. And I think that without getting someone to check it, it's actually more risky. That's just my personal view. This is not legal advice. This is legal education. And based on my experience as a consultant, working a lot with contracts, this is what I see. And I see them, so I change them. But the ones that I don't see, and this is obviously a sign that people are using AI-generated contracts, and it does concern me. So I would strongly recommend getting legal advice from a lawyer or a legal consultant. If that's not available to you, then write it in your own words rather than getting this legal jargon from an AI that doesn't even necessarily make sense. Okay, so what we've covered today is what's contract actually got to do with copyright? What do I actually need to understand before signing a contract? Can I renegotiate my contract? And can I get an AI to write a contract for me? In today's society, you do have to be on top of your contracts. You do have to be on top of your admin. At the end of the day, you're in the business of your creative work. And if you are not on top of that kind of admin, you don't have to be if it's something that's like a hobby and you're just enjoying. But if you want to make a business, if you want to make money out of your creative work, and being on top of your admin, your copyright, and managing your contracts can be the difference between success or failure. So remember, you must get legal advice before you sign a contract. Know your rights. Consider what kind of artist you want to be, and remember, you're in the business of music. Okay, so that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Follow Whose Song Is It Anyway on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts for more. And I'll keep on breaking it all down for you. In the meantime, you can grab a copy of my book, Copyright in the Music Industry, your go-to practical guide for navigating copyright and IP with clarity and confidence. I've linked to it in the show notes for you. See you in the next episode.